Good morning, friends, or afternoon, as it were. As you're scrolling through your feeds today, if you hear nothing else, I want you to know that you are beautiful, you are beloved, and absolutely worthy of love. And there is nothing that you, or anybody else for that matter, can do to change that fact. And if you're sticking around with me for a few minutes today, I'm so glad. If I don't know who you are, my name is Will Green. I am an associate pastor and the director of discipleship at Foundry United Methodist Church. And this is the time we set aside each Monday to share some thoughts and do some thinking as we kick off our week. I am glad again that you are here. And if you will take just a minute now to drop a note in the comments to let me know where you're joining in from, that is just a way that I can celebrate the fact that you've come alongside me today. So today, I want to talk about Bruno. And if you don't get that reference, less specifically, I want to talk for just a little bit about Disney's new movie Encanto, which details the story of a family blessed with a series of miracles, magical powers that get passed from generation to generation, that both help strengthen their community and hold them together as a family. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a really great thing, right? And the movie kicks off with this really fun and kind of beautiful image of this family exercising these magical powers and gifts as they build community in this city that's kind of grown up around their casita, their house that is alive with the magic of their miracle. But underneath the surface of that miracle is a complex series of family relationships shaped by all kinds of expectations and family history, which in some ways really kind of undermine the magic of the miracle and put it at real risk. Now, without giving away too much of the movie, because you should absolutely, without question, drop everything you're doing and go watch it, I do want to say that there is this central question that emerges that I continue to find really sticky or really interesting, particularly in light of our lectionary reading from the Revised Common Lectionary this Sunday, 1 Corinthians 12, where the scripture talks about spiritual gifts. And the question is this: how are our expectations of ourselves, of our communities, of our relationships, of our partners, of our workplaces, whatever those places might be where we hold expectation, how are our expectations preventing us from receiving opportunities for deeper love, for greater joy, or for new life? One of the things that Encanto really, I think, explores is the way that it is so easy to become stuck in the rut of our personal preferences or our sense of obligation, that we inadvertently dismiss what we perceive as impractical or uncomfortable or different, without ever fully considering what something new or something different or a new chance to lean into something might offer. There's this character, Isabel, for instance. And I'm not going to talk too much about her gift, but part of what Isabel struggles with is this question of what is acceptable. With the power that she's been given, she has this idea of what's okay and what's not okay. And she winds up really, rather than living into the fullness of the gift that she's been given, stuck in this kind of performative way of being in the world that's really, on the surface, very happy, but underneath is really not. She's really sad. She feels really stuck. She feels really upset. Perhaps you've been in that kind of space too. Rather than claiming the space to be who we know God has called us to be, or to own and celebrate not what other people think is acceptable, but what brings us joy, we sometimes have a tendency to force ourselves to fit into others' expectations, right? Or to be defined by what we think will receive the least resistance from our communities. Anybody else had that happen? Or anybody else found themselves in a relationship like that? The outcome of that is hardly ever life. The outcome of that is hardly ever joy. Instead, what winds up happening is we kind of slip into this amnesia of sorts, this spiritual, emotional amnesia, where we forget what it's like to feel joy, to feel love, to feel life. And we need people and we need opportunities and we need chances to kind of break out of the myth of the acceptable in order to be able to move beyond what we've thought was possible. And the other thing that I think I'm really reminded of as we think about this question of being stuck in personal preferences or senses of obligation is the myth of the practical or the productive. There's another character in the movie, Louisa. Louisa, let's just say that I've got some. I connect with Louisa on a very personal level. Louisa has kind of bought into this myth that her life is defined by what she can produce. Her life is defined by how she performs for the sake of others. And what winds up happening is that in this really wonderful song, you find that under the surface of all of this performative, practical stuff that Louisa is doing, she feels constantly under pressure, constantly overwhelmed, constantly worn out, constantly like she's not enough. You know, we live in a world that tells us that our lives are defined by or only worth what we produce, that we have to produce, that we have to perform as a way of proving that our choices are worthy, that our relationships are worthy, that our vocation is worthy. And ultimately, what winds up happening is that we reduce ourselves and others to machines rather than people. We become objects, kind of bumping up against one another in the world. And what we forget is that joy isn't always practical. That love, whether it's the love we have for a community or the love we have for our beloved or the love that we have for God, doesn't always make a whole lot of sense. What's right, what's just, what's merciful, what's loving doesn't always produce results in terms of the way that perhaps we want to quantify or qualify what's worthy. Our job is not to produce. Our job is to live. God's will for us is abundant life. And both of these myths, the myth of the acceptable and the myth of the practical or productive, they really kind of ignore the fact that God's will is that we live in a way that more love, more life, more justice, and more mercy is born into the world. You've probably heard that saying, all work and no play makes whomever a dull person. And I think that's absolutely true. In order for us to fully embody who we're created to be, we have to begin to deconstruct the myth of the practical and the productive, the myth of the acceptable. You know, the other thing that comes up in this movie that I think is important as we think about this question of expectations and the way in which God is giving us what we need to be who we're called to be in the world, is that it's easy to allow past pain and lingering resentments and unprocessed grief to keep us from perceiving the places where there is new strength, where there are fresh gifts, where there are emerging opportunities for us to meet the needs and challenges of today and to more fully come alive in our relationships with God and with one another. The kind of penultimate character of the movie is Abuela, the grandmother who first receives this miracle. And for a variety of reasons, she's become disconnected from the real gift that's been given to her and her family, in part because of all this past stuff that's keeping her from fully perceiving what she's got in that moment. One of the things that I think winds up happening for so many of us, particularly in a world where talking about things like pain and resentment and grief is not okay, is that we forget that we have to almost daily, I think, turn inward enough to acknowledge the stuff that we're holding so that it doesn't keep us from perceiving the ways that new people in our lives, new invitations to serve and grow, new opportunities to step out in prophetic witness aren't being missed. Resentment and grief in particular have this funny way of making us feel like nothing will ever really change, right? We become stuck in what we've experienced in the past such that we can't fully perceive what's happening in the present. And part of what I love about Encanto is that it invites us to acknowledge that, not in a way that makes us feel guilty about those facts. All of us have that stuff that we carry around with us, that baggage that we bear, but rather to acknowledge that it doesn't need to define who we are right now. And when we do that, when we actually are willing to do that work, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, I think we find that God is then able to kind of emerge and begin to invite us into new places and into new ways of being and into new relationships. Um, at the end of the day, the thing that I guess that I've been thinking about the most is that we're always promised. We're promised in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. We're promised in Isaiah 43, which we're using for our Lenten devotional, that God is always at work in us and with us to give us what we need to be who we're called to be right now. God is always at work in us and through us and in the world, so that not only do we have the gift of abundant life that we talked about just a little bit ago, but we have the resources and the tools and the capacity that we need to face the future without fear. God is always at work making things new, so that what's happened in the past need not define what's happening in our present and need not control our future. Our call and our invitation then is to practice the kind of awareness, the kind of intention in our relationship with God, with ourselves, and with one another, and the kind of trust to be able to perceive that. So, I want to invite you as we step into this week and into the coming weeks to think about what it would mean for you to practice that kind of awareness or that kind of intention. What baggage do you need to name or to open up and unpack? What relationships do you need to really step into or lean into it so that you can receive the full gift that they're offering you? What things do you need to lay down or let go of? What myths have been defining your life in a way that are preventing you from receiving what God has for you to receive right now? And as you do that work, I hope that what you find is greater freedom and greater joy and greater opportunity to face each day that you face without fear and with a lot of love. I think that's what I've got for you today, friends. And I am so glad again that you've been with me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being with me. And until next time, remember, be gentle with yourselves, be gentle with one another, and take good care. Bye for now.